Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Why Should Executives Care? Technology Driving Business Outcomes. I'm Chuck Zwicker. I'm the president of Weidenhammer. I thank you for joining us. This is the vidcast series presented to you by Weidenhammer, really focused on today's leading technologies, but in the context of why should executives care? How is it driving business growth, business value? How does it align to our objectives? So often we find that technology and technology decisions are not being presented to executives in the context of how is it helping them meet their business goals and their objectives. So what we attempt to do in this series is to interview both experts from our own organization as well as from our clients to drive down onto that very topic. Talk about technology, educate people on what they need to know about new technology, but do it in the context of why should I care as an executive? How's it going to help us meet our business goals and our business outcomes? So it's less about a deep dive into technology, but rather understanding technology at a level to equate it to why should we care and how should it drive and help us to drive our business growth. So we thank you for joining. We look forward to this next episode.
Welcome, everybody, to today's mid-market security conversation. I'm Jody Pillard. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm excited to have a great discussion queued up today. And we're going to discuss basically how mid-market organizations can navigate their cybersecurity challenges with the limited resources that we pretty much all have, while still protecting your business, your reputation, your growth. And as part of that conversation, we've got a handful of key areas we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with some risks to the mid-market businesses and how that factors in, how they factor into today's landscape. We're going to talk about ways that modern mid-market firms are defending themselves against attacks, mitigating the results of any attacks and attempted attacks, and then how they're managing those costs associated with those two types of prevention and protection. Of course, we have to talk about how AI is impacting both sides of the coin, meaning on the attack side as well as on the defense side and mitigation. And then none of this really works if we can't integrate it effectively into our own tools and processes and systems that we use today. So we'll talk through that a bit. So I'm joined by a really impressive group of panelists. We've got Tony Cardellaro, who is the Vice President of the Cloud and Infrastructure Group at Weidenhammer. We've got Don Douglas, who's a Senior Cloud Solutions Architect. And we have Philip Rosen, a Senior Sales Engineer at Arctic Wolf. So let's just kind of ground this conversation right out of the gate, Tony, and talk about risk. When we think of risk to mid-market businesses in this context, what are some things that maybe we are not thinking about or overlooking in terms of risk to mid-market businesses today?
Jody, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of things that could be on that list today. You've touched on a wide variety of topics that we're going to cover likely in this conversation, a lot of different trends that are happening today as it relates to cybersecurity that kind of spiders out and really kind of has dotted lines to this topic. To start with, I could say that from a cybersecurity perspective, a lot of what's going on in the industry, especially around mid-market, is that breaches or attacks are getting much more sophisticated in nature. One of the first things that I'll mention is that what we're seeing a lot of in the industry is a lot of advanced attacks, persistent attacks. These are threats that are lingering in environments for a long period of time. They sit in the environment. They remain undetected for days, weeks, months, and in some cases even nearly a year or more. And they kind of slowly kind of fester and infiltrate and look at what's going on within the environment to see what they can see within the environment, what type of sensitive data may or may not exist, and then slowly but surely start to, exfiltrate data and, do what it is they intended to do, the bad act that they intended to do. And a lot of times, in the mid-market, sometimes those organizations just kind of lack, the tools to look at and monitor those attack surfaces. They don't have the ability to monitor. If they have the tools, they don't have the ability, the staff or the resources to monitor those tools. So that's an area where we're seeing a lot of growth in the mid-market in terms of those bad actors taking advantage of that. Another area is supply chain infiltration. So if you think about, you as a mid-market organization, think about all the suppliers that are providing you with information, and the integration and the data that's flowing between you as an organization and your supply chain partners. What does that integration look like? How secure are those integration points? Continuing down the list, and then get into kind of traditional things like credential harvesting. So now you're looking at phishing campaigns, social engineering. These are kind of traditional attack surfaces that we're used to hearing. Emails coming into your inbox trying to look for and obtain credentials. And these are things that hopefully are being mitigated by cybersecurity awareness training, things like that. And then it goes on. I mean, insider threats, whether it's on purpose or by accident, the human firewall is important, making sure that staff are trained. And again, mid-market organizations have the resources to keep their staff trained and up to speed on what's going on in the industry, what to look out for, what to make sure that they're following proper cyber hygiene, things like that. Then it's just IT governance, right? In terms of cyber, as it relates to cybersecurity, but also just from an IT governance standpoint, making sure that they're aligning their governance and their IT spend along with cybersecurity spend, making sure they're getting the right return on those investments, they're spending the dollars in the right areas, and they're if they're employing the tools that we've talked about early on here, looking to see if they can mitigate some of these advanced threats. Make sure that they have the ability to sustain the budget, sustain the resources and the bandwidth, and so on and so forth. Making sure that they're keeping aligned with the talent, making sure that their IT resources have the skill set to understand what's going on and keeping pace with the tools and what's going on in the industry, and maintaining certifications and understand that type of thing. So there's a whole wide variety of things that the mid-market needs to kind of stay ahead of. And some of it's kind of new that we're seeing in the industry, but some of it's table stakes. And then the list continues. Making sure we're not relying on some legacy systems. Oftentimes we see that in the mid-market. Organizations don't have the budget to sustain infrastructure. It's kind of that old adage where they're relying on older systems because they don't have an IT budget that allows them to keep pace with keeping up with current IT environments, and making sure they're patching and upgrading hardware and maintaining that. So they start to fall behind, and that now becomes an area of risk. And the last thing I'll mention is that's important across any organization, whether big or small, is that cybersecurity is not just an IT issue. It really is something that affects the entire organization, and that's a mindset change within an organization. They need to really be cognizant of that, and it starts with the leadership, and it goes down all the way down to the individual employee. So those are things that organizations need to keep in mind as they start to think about risk and staying ahead of the curve as it relates to IT and cybersecurity.
I'd like to piggyback off what you said and really call out two parts. The first is mid-market organizations tend to be really good at a couple of things in-house. And if we refer back to, I'm a GRC man, so I take everything from a GRC perspective. If we look at these big GRC structures, critical security controls, NIST cybersecurity risk framework, the Australian critical security controls, all these frameworks have hundreds of items in them, hundreds of controls that need to be regularly assessed as part of a greater risk format, where on a yearly or every couple of years basis, organizations go back and look through their environment. That tends not to happen. They try to treat cybersecurity like a tool problem. I bought a thing and now I'm safe. And that mindset is the thing that gets mid-market organizations. They get really good at one specific aspect of security, and it works for a while. They buy one set of tools and they become subject matter expert in one set of tools, or they buy a bunch of tools and they don't get good at really any of them, and they kind of molder on the shelf. But then what happens is the security landscape changes. something that they're not good at, something they don't have expertise, becomes the new significant threat, and threat actors find that really quickly in the threat actor ecosystem. And then you'll see these waves of cyber attacks against specific firewalls, specific content management systems, which I'm sure we're all aware of, but I'm not going to name here, against specific VPN vendors, against specific MFA products. You see these wave of attacks. And when organizations treat risk like a thing that you buy a tool to solve and not a process that the whole enterprise is continually involved with, that's when you see these huge waves of cyber attacks that impact large swaths of mid-market organizations.
And Philip, just a definition check there. You used the term GRC at the beginning of that. What does that mean?
Governance, risk, and compliance. So it's exactly as Anthony was talking about. Governance is the structure where leadership takes a role in ownership and security outcomes. Risk are all the different ways that we can calculate danger to an environment based on the value of their assets, the likelihood of an attack, the specific vulnerabilities of a thing, the impact that those attacks will have, and then finally compliance. Complying with these rules that an organization has seen as their North Star, as their specific ways to mitigate those risks. Those are all really critical parts of cybersecurity.
And I'll just add one thing here that's important is a lot of organizations that we may come in contact with as a provider in the mid-market or any market really, a lot of times we hear, well, we're not really subject to compliance. And the answer is, well, you kind of are. There is some level of due diligence that organizations really do need to follow. And, you know, if they ask their insurance carrier, I'm sure they would disagree if they heard them make that statement. We're not subject to compliance. I think their cyber insurance carrier would beg to differ. There is some, you know, level of, you know, due diligence that organizations do need to follow. And there are several frameworks out there that, you know, organizations can follow. You know, Philip mentioned a few of them that are, again, not terribly complicated in terms of how they lay them out, but they're not, it's not something that can become what I refer to lovingly as a credenza document. In other words, they go through the list, they check a bunch of boxes, and they say, okay, we're good, and I can set this on the credenza and leave it there for a period of time and never have to, you know, kind of come back to it for a year, 2 years, 3, whatever. No, it's a living document that needs to be monitored, and someone needs to own this and remind the organization on a regular cadence that we need to continue to, you know, stay in front of this, not be reactive, but be proactive. Because again, Philip mentioned this, that, you know, threats change, technology is ever evolving, and threat actors are always looking for a way in. So, you know, the point of the framework is that, you know, all of these framework providers that are third party and independent are constantly evolving the frameworks to stay ahead of the threat actors. Our job as providers is to help our clients, and our clients, these, you know, organizations, need to do their part by, you know, adopting the frameworks and trying to maintain compliance. Of course, some are regulated. You know, clients who are regulated by HIPAA and PCI DSS, and they're, you know, to name a few, there are plenty of, you know, alphabet soup type compliance, you know, requirements around there. But the point is, everyone has some due diligence to be had here, and it's important that they understand what that is and work towards that North Star, as Philip has mentioned.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing loud and clear is, we pretty quickly go from something that historically has been thought of as a technical or an IT function to something that really needs to be integrated into a broader risk management strategy for the organization. And so with that, Philip, if those are the risks, what are we seeing from external factors, people like cyber insurance carriers, and how they're approaching that, and how that's changed over the last handful of years, if at all?
Yeah, there's been enormous change in cyber insurance companies. There's been some companies that have moved to vertical integration with a number of different kind of security products, and they're asking their clients to come on board and take those products on board as well. They're But all cyber insurance providers have gotten a lot tighter about what they require for due diligence acts, which they contractually require in terms of compliance from their customers. They require specific technical controls, not just to exist, but to be updated and functioning in a good manner, like VPNs, firewalls, multi-factor authentication, the regular purge of old users, ranges in anything from 4 subnotes in an insurance document to full-blown assessments that they require for their customers to use. What I've seen in the incident space is I've seen fairly large, sophisticated organizations get cyber insurance claims denied because in an attestation that they sent to their provider, we're doing all the things you tell us we need to do. And then they get compromised by one of those very controls. And it is incredibly cut and dried. The cyber insurance for insurance providers has been, in many ways, a difficult proposition that had very thin margins because of the difficulty in risking organizations and the difficulty in creating this new kinds of coverage from cyber insurance, so that the cyber insurance companies are very quick to deny claims that can sometimes be enormously expensive when they see, well, your multi-factor authenticator was misconfigured, and that's how the attacker was able to compromise your system, or your VPN was unpatched. They didn't use a 0-day, they used a 90-day or 180-day-old flaw to attack your environment. And you say you have a patch management program, and you say critical patches are rolled out within 3 days. I've seen many of these instances that are heartbreaking when people think they're doing the right things because they have this tool-centric approach. We bought the tool, we installed the tool, we signed the cybersecurity paperwork, and then we left it alone. And then later those systems degrade, they're not kept up, they're not assessed, there's not a robust risk management or vulnerability management process and program. And then those organizations are compromised and they go to the provider who they've been paying coverage to, and they are shocked. It's important to have really good cybersecurity vendor partners who work with you, who can not just keep you abreast of what's happening when they sell you a thing, but who are also bundling some kind of service that includes regular updates, regular touch points, and improvements in security posture over time. And it can be tragic when that doesn't happen.
So it's obvious that if a breach occurs, there are real costs to that. If you have regulatory compliance, there could be fines. There's the cost of downtime, reputational risk, lack of client trust and loyalty, all the things that I think we pretty much know about by this point. They've been roughly the same for the last several years. But then on the flip side of that a little bit, what about for organizations that are really trying to do the right thing? They're trying to follow all the right guidance from their insurers and so forth, but they say, boy, this feels awfully expensive too. The insurance is expensive, putting these technologies and hiring people is expensive. How do we make this case? If let's say I'm a technology leader in my firm and I'm trying to make that case to my board or my executive leadership, what can I do to try to manage those costs in a way that is more proactive than just reactive?
That's a great question. The biggest lever that a security manager or a CISO has when working with their board is business interruption. It's the most definable. What is the cost to my organization to not having IT resources for 15 days? Best case, that's a very average breach downtime from a serious cybersecurity incident. That assumes nearly full recovery, which is very difficult to do. What would happen if we didn't have IT resources, or our IT resources were 75% degraded for 14 days? That is going to represent some kind of dollar amount of cost. And that dollar amount of cost, right, when you're doing your risk analysis, that dollar amount is going to represent what, if you are not bringing to your regular security practice, then you are significantly under risking your organization. There are other risks outside of that, right? You called some of them out. Brand management, like, can your brand survive a hit where you have to go to your customers, and not just your customers, but your partners, your vendors, and say, we can't pay you. We have the money, but we don't know where it is. Yes, we sent you emails saying that you needed to log into a new portal and pay us, but those were actually the criminals who took over our systems. Those kinds of brand consequences are so massive. They're hard to describe in dollar amounts. It's much easier to talk about downtime, replacing equipment, what the lost wages are going to be. How do you keep your people if your HR system is down, if your financial systems are down, if your access to your bank is cut off? What happens if you accept credit cards and the Payment Card Industries Security Standards Council levies a 5-figure fine every month until you meet a set of standards through third-party audits and attestations? It's extremely costly, and you can quantify those costs and take them to your board for help.
And I know, Philip, sometimes the litany of requirements from the cyber insurance providers can feel like a lot, can feel almost impossible. And we know how expensive personnel is in general, but particularly in cybersecurity. So for many of our clients, we hear from them, I would love to hire a security engineer, but I can't afford it. Or even if I can afford it, I can't find one. Or even if I can find one, I can't keep one because they get poached by a bigger, larger firm that has more money to spend than I do. How do we mitigate that? How do you defend against that as a mid-market business?
Yeah, the sort of low-hanging fruit here is to work with a services company and a services provider who's going to provide you an outcome. You can do risk transference to a third party, which really helps. It is an enormous benefit as a IT manager, IT director, a CIO, to be able to say, these people who we trust are taking care of this risk for us. And in the event that they have a problem, we will find another vendor, rather than to say, I have built this empire. This is entirely mine. We will have no problems. And then if there is a problem, it's entirely on you. Getting trusted vendors, getting security as a service with a service-based company, someone who's not just trying to throw tools at you and saying, now go to town, is enormously helpful.
And if I do that, and I've got everything right in place, I've now checked all those boxes, and not just to check the boxes, but I'm doing them genuinely, right? Maybe through a partner, maybe through my internal resources, maybe through a combination. I do all of that. That all has a cost, and it has a benefit in protecting me from the risks that you've articulated. Is there anything I can do to go back to the insurance carrier and try to get them to, so that I'm not paying the same as someone who is maybe disingenuously approaching this?
Absolutely. I certainly see that having good relationships, having good security vendors, having good products in place, having coherent arguments really allow organizations to reduce the cost of cyber insurance 100%. The fine details of that depend on your broker and the insurer. But many cyber insurance underwriters will happily charge people less as they improve their security posture.
Terrific. Now, that is a fantastic ideal to work towards. Don, I got to ask you, though, as I'm thinking through this, there's a lot of coverage here. There's a lot of efficiency required to be able to scale this thing, especially with the volume of threats that Tony and Philip have been talking about here. When I think efficiency now, one of the first things I think is, can I use AI for this? So in that context, is that realistic? I mean, there's a lot of AI hype, which is exciting, but there's also a lot of fear. And then there's a lot of, is this just overblown? Is this just that? It's purely hype. So where are we in this with respect to AI and some of the stuff we've been talking about for protecting ourselves?
Yeah. I'm actually proud of us. We went this far without bringing up AI in this conversation because you can't buy anything without talking about AI, right? And there's a ton of misconceptions out there about AI, right? How good it is, how bad it is, what it's able to do. And a lot of that misconception is driven by the marketing fluff around it, right? And the people that make the AI, it's infallible. It'll do whatever you want. Reality is that's not really the case, right? AI can't fully replace a trusted security partner or a human security specialist. You need both, right? The reason you need both is AI does a great job at automation, at recognizing patterns, at driving efficiency, right? But it needs a baseline to work from to identify attacks, for example, right? It needs to know what attack looks like. So if there's a new 0-day, if there's a novel attack, if there's something it hasn't seen before, it might be slow to find it. It needs a higher level of reasoning working with the tool, right? Something to tell it, no, that was a false positive. No, that was a false negative. Help to train the tool, help to apply that level of reasoning and strategy above what the tool can do. And the other side of that on the AI piece is, what if the AI is what's being attacked, right? We've all heard about, oh, well, if you give AI the right prompts, if you give the right input, you can get AI to work against its own best interests. People have done it with ChatGPT, with Claude, whatever, get it to break its guardrails and do something it's not supposed to do. And as more security vendors build more AI into their solutions, the bad guys are going to look at that too and say, what can I do to break it? So you need to have that extra level of oversight over that AI. But AI can be a powerful tool for your security team to work as a force multiplier for that team to automate rote tasks, to analyze gigs and terabytes of logs in minutes rather than days, right? So it's got its place, but it's not a replacement.
So you mentioned something that caught my attention there, Don, which is we talked to some firms that say, you know what, I'm going to wait till the dust settles. I'm not going to deploy AI yet because I'm not prepared to deal with the risks, and I'll just wait and let things settle down, and then I can make a move on that. But then you also mentioned it being built into tools that I might be using. So how do I navigate that?
It's good to be cautious. Like, some level of wait and see applies to some areas, but you also have to be aware that the defense side is not the only side with AI, right? The attackers have AI. They're using it. They're using it as the force multiplier. You need to have some tools on your side to meet that challenge. And you need to better arm your security team, whether that's an in-house, massive team that you decided to build out yourself, or it's your security partner that you brought in as a managed security solution. You need to give them those tools so that they can be more efficient, up-level those skills, apply those tools to help them respond faster, see more, go more in depth. And that mix of, I'm going to use an AI to do what AI is good at, and then have that bubble up to a human to make the real decisions, is not just for security, but just about anything. It's called human in the loop, right? You get AI to do what AI is good at, parse those logs, look for those patterns, correlate events, surface what needs to be looked at, and then bubble that up to a human to take a look at that and go, yes, this is real. No, this isn't real. Let's make strategic moves here. Let's dig deeper if we need to go deeper, and then make that strategy decision and initiate whatever the recovery is. And that recovery might go back out through that AI. Hey, go do this, go lock that account, go do whatever. Or it might be, we're going to, initiate a different plan. It's more manual, whatever. But that tool helps that human get to that faster, because the attackers are getting to the point where you need to react faster. Does that?
Yes. Yeah. And so that makes perfect sense to me. We want to be mindful and purposeful in our adoption of AI, but recognize at the same time that malicious actors are going to be using it, and we're way on our heels and at a disadvantage if we don't at least meet them where they are to protect ourselves. Now, if I'm doing that, I'm whether I'm excited about it or not, I'm sort of adopting some AI myself, right? With that, one of the things we've learned about AI over the last several years is, in order to really get the most out of it and to make it the most effective it can be, it needs access to data. It needs some level of workflow. So I sometimes worry about giving it too much access, because that's what I'm trying to protect to begin with. But at the same time, if I don't give it that, I'm not maximizing the value. So how do I deal with that integration and access for the tools that I do use, like Microsoft 365, for example?
So yeah, that's going to come down to a layered approach, right? You're going to need, you have all of that data in Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 has some AI. You're going to be plugging in other AI productivity tools. You're going to be plugging in your security solution that has some AI. So having the right data security posture around that, masking the data when sensitive data gets pulled out into logs, your security solution is going to be focused more on the logging of what occurs in that environment than the data itself. So Microsoft 365 and most of your tier one cloud-based tools and even on-prem tools have the ability to say, okay, I'm going to mask sensitive information as it goes into my logs so that my logs don't become a point where my data gets compromised. It's those logs then that your security tool that you're going to plug in to do that log collection through APIs or SIM integrations, things like that, to pull that in, is going to get the information. Think of it as what happened, not so much the sensitive information that it happened on, right? And so you collect all that and you take your security platform, and all of your cloud-based tools and a lot of your on-prem tools, they're all going to have an API solution in them these days, right? And think of API as the universal language that all these applications talk, and it's how they're able to pass information between each other. So a good security platform is going to be able to plug into that. It'll have some built connectors. It'll be able to ingest all that information from all of these different platforms and put it into one correlated log environment. That's called a SIM tool or a SIEM tool, Security Information and Event Management. And that's where that AI sits. And it looks at all those logs from all those places, and it's able to see one event that might span multiple solutions, multiple platforms, and correlate them together and pull that up and say, user A logged into Microsoft 365 at this time from this location, did these things, but at the same time logged into Dropbox or Salesforce or something from a different location and did something over there. And if I put all that together, that smells fishy. That doesn't look good. That looks like maybe a compromised account or something happening there. And that's what that AI sees. It sees what happened, and then it's able to close this loop. That AI is good at that, right? And it bubbles that up and it says, hey, human, I see something weird. Should we do something about it, right? And that's where that human in the loop kicks in, and the human says, yeah, that is weird. Good job, AI. And you train the AI, and it gets better, and it gets more accurate, and it gets, to be a better tool for that human, and you're protected and up and moving. But your data is as safe as your data security posture in those solutions that you're plugging into.
Just to beat the drum a little bit more, these are great tools, but once again, like, tools are not the thing that are going to keep you protected. What's going to keep you protected is continually assessing your risk through some kind of risk management framework, having a culture of security where the leadership believes in it and they believe in investing in it, and then having trusted third parties, trusted partners who can assist if you're not familiar with new tools, or who can validate, if you are familiar with the new tools, that you're using them correctly and that you continue to update your practices in accordance with best. You can continue to update your policies with best practices. That loop of self-assessment, onboarding new technology, making sure you're using it correctly, getting third-party validation, that loop should be something that's part of your company's DNA. Else, you have this large risk from tools like popular CRM tools used by massive organizations being compromised because AI agents have root permissions to all data stores.
So, Tony, I'd like to circle back to something you said at the beginning, because this leads to that. There's a lot that needs to be taken care of, whether it's in-house, which frankly, most mid-market organizations don't have the resources to handle with lean IT and so forth. But let's say they work in tandem with a trusted partner, they're doing all these things. It strikes me as one of those situations in which, if this is all working to its maximum potential, there's very little to show for it, right? Everything, there's no problem. That is the indication. It's like a kicker in football, right? You only hear about them when they miss. How do I, as an IT professional, translate that for my executives and show that I'm getting a return on these not insignificant investments that I'm making?
We talked a little bit about that already when we talked about, reputation, operational resilience, making sure the business is able to operate, customer trust, customer retention. I think Philip mentioned even, regulatory fines or any kind of issues there. I think one of the examples we used was PCI DSS. PCI is for credit card transactions. They're the compliance organization for credit card processing and transactions. So if you remain non-compliant, they have the right to assess you a fine for a period of time until you get compliant. These are all things that are real and that can, obviously hurt you in the wallet as an organization if you are not maintaining compliance with, the policy procedure around those different regulatory bodies. And then, we talk about reputation, we talk about operational resilience, things of that nature. There are other ways to calculate kind of return on investment. Traditional ways, I won't bore you and pull out the chalkboard and start showing you all kinds of equations. There's a standard that business leaders, CIOs, CTOs use to calculate what's known as FAIR, factor analysis and information risk. If you're not familiar with it, you can Google that and you'll find it. And basically, there's an equation that's used to calculate, the single loss expectancy, versus the annual rate of occurrence, so on and so forth. So there's, some stuff there that you can do that. But essentially what it comes down to is kind of things we talked about, which is, let's take a look at what it costs to implement, risk mitigation. So we're gonna look at the cost to implement a tool set, which again, tools are not the only answer, but let's talk about the dollars and cents of this. There's the cost to implement a tool set. There's the cost involved in training for that tool set. You don't want to lose that, as well. That's part of the recipe. So we've got a cost factor there in terms of time and effort to get our IT staff up to speed on how that's done. And there's hard costs there, dollars and cents as well in that. And then there's a calculation that can be made in terms of, well, what is the business risk if there were an occurrence? So if we, let's just say for argument, ransomware attack could cost the organization $500,000 in loss. But the tool set with training and so on and so forth is $100,000 investment. Well, if we make the investment, we're saving roughly $400,000. I mean, simple, mathematics that business leaders can understand. So there's some things that can be done, on the back of the napkin in terms of dollars and cents that we can show our business leaders. But then there are things that I would take it a step further. In my role is, I've in my career, I've done this for organizations and look at other things too that are important to business leaders. Things like tracking, efficiency. I want to look at sustainability here. I want to talk about, we talked about the tool set and how it can be implemented. Again, it's sort of like autopilot on an airplane. It's a great tool, but you still need a pilot. Right? You're not going to just rely on the autopilot in an airplane. You still, if I'm a passenger in the back, I don't want to know that the autopilot's the only thing we got up front. I want to make sure there's a certified pilot flying the airplane. I want to make sure there's still a human involved in the loop here, making sure that there's still human eyes reviewing the risk. But if there's a tool set that can be implemented to help reduce some of the manual effort, Well, that's an efficiency. And there's ways to track that. A lot of the tools that are now on the market today build in a lot of different KPIs and ways to measure those metrics, because they know that there more and more business leaders want to see the measurable gains from the investments being made on these different platforms. So there's ways that we can capture that information and explain to business leaders that, by way of the platform, looking at, the environment, leveraging different technologies, including AI, we're gaining efficiency by getting a broader look, faster insights, less human intervention, but where needed, specific intervention that's much more focused and much faster response time. These are the benefits. So again, tracking those efficiencies and bubbling that up to our business leaders. Also important not to get lost in the weeds in terms of the technical jargon. Business leaders are great at business stuff, but they may not be experts in everything tech. So important not to spend too much time on a lot of technical jargon, getting in the weeds there, but keep things high level enough that they understand what we're talking about in terms of the technical and the business use cases and things of that nature. Another good important piece is looking at our peers as an organization. So benchmarking ourselves as an organization against our peers in the market to see how we're doing against them. So if I'm a manufacturer, if I'm a nonprofit, if I'm whoever I am as an organization, how am I doing as it relates to cybersecurity awareness training, how we're doing, different metrics that I can benchmark myself against my peers in the industry, similar size, similar scale, similar market, and give that information to my business leaders. Becomes kind of a competition, not a bad thing, and it helps improve the ability for me to go and talk to business leaders to say, we're going to try and keep up with our competition in similar space. These are the things our peers are doing. We need to keep pace with that, or potentially maybe even outpace them to create market advantage. This, believe it or not, could be something that could be used for market advantage. And then, we talk about engaging our business leaders. Philip made a very good point, and it's critical that this is not an IT problem. I said it at the start. Philip reinforced it. This is not just an IT problem. Cybersecurity is not an IT process or something that IT has to own on its own. This is something that needs to be shared across the organization. Every operational department has a piece of this, and we need business leaders' engagement and support, stakeholder support from them. It starts at the top. So we want to make sure that they understand that we're working towards risk reduction. There's obviously financial impact. We talked about how we could calculate some of those things. We want to talk about how it aligns to our business strategy. It should be in all those conversations as well across the organization. So it really needs to be part of the overall DNA. I mean, Philip said it best, the overall DNA of the organization. And wherever it's being talked about, we want to talk about the business case. We want to talk about the technical outcomes and expectations. And we want to talk about how do we measure success? Success can be measured in dollars and cents, but success can also be measured in efficiency, risk mitigation, business impact improvement, all types of different ways. And you'll find that once you start to incorporate it into the DNA of the organization, you'll find that it's very easy to start to realize and recognize the return on the investments that are being made.
Boy, so we've covered a lot of ground today, guys, from risk and return on investment to insurance, managed security operations, AI, and where that fits into the picture, how I integrate this with my existing systems or maybe modernized systems, tools and processes. And I picked up a couple themes throughout the conversation here. One is how critical it is to make risk meaningful to executives. And if I'm an executive, to understand the risk in non-technical terms. I'm not asking people to be engineers here, but also the importance of scaling, but with limited resources, recognizing we are not all of a sudden going to be 10,000 employee companies with resources coming out of our ears, but we still need the ability to scale both with our organizational growth as well as with the growth of threats. And we should be intelligent and thoughtful about taking advantage of benefits of AI, but also doing so responsibly. And I guess as I'm saying these out loud, they all sort of come down to translating the complex and obtuse and technical into clear, understandable drivers, results, and protective mechanisms that I can employ both on the tool and process and personnel side. So obviously, look, we know that cybersecurity is not a 45-minute conversation or so. So I do encourage everybody in the audience to connect with our panelists. We'll share their contact information, ask questions, explore how this stuff can work in your own organization. If we sparked hopefully a new idea or two that kicks off a conversation within your organization, then really I feel good about the conversation today and really appreciate the time. Philip, Don, Tony, and everybody who joined us. Thank you very much.